So, what do I do? Pause and wait for you to respond to that question. That's a very stressful moment whenever anyone comes across that question. What do I do? Tell me what to do. Anyone who has ever worked in or around substance abuse treatment of any kind is familiar with that question. Also, anyone with a lot of empathy and anyone who has ever been in the shoes of a loved one of someone who has an addiction problem is also familiar with that question on either side of it, one way or the other. It's a very difficult question. What do I do if I have a friend, a family member, or a loved one who is struggling with drug addiction, dependence, or overuse? And if I'm suffering from dependence and addiction symptoms, what should I be aware of in the relationship dynamics of what go into treatment? How do I approach the people who are wondering how they should approach me? Well, we're going to take a crack at that today. We've got some excellent information to share with you today from a great conversation with David Livingston and Claire Wiseman. We're going to talk about families and the things that you can run into that become obstacles to entering treatment that can help to facilitate recovery, and some of the perceptions and traps that we fall into all around these issues with relationships and addiction. How do I approach a family member to talk about their drug use? That can be a very touchy issue to bring up with people, especially if it's in connection with being concerned about their use of intoxicants.
I think start with timing is everything. So it can't be in a time of conflict. It can't be in a time of anger. It has to start the conversation in a time where the conversation was chosen as a helpful two-sided conversation, where the person, the user, is being heard, is being allowed to speak, and also the user is given options. I think when you give people options, you allow them to be a bit in control of the situation, what is very welcoming to people to start a conversation. What do you think, David?
One of the things that I think can be helpful is just to approach it from the perspective of health, right? Just to almost move it away from the personal a little bit, just in terms of I'm concerned about your health type thing and what's going on and so forth, and allow, so that it doesn't feel like a personal confrontation as much as it is a, genuine concern about an individual's health. And I think it's often heard better. And then you can move into, the idea of what's going on that's healthy and not healthy. And there's some distance between, what could be a person feeling embarrassed or ashamed or other things. And because in the end, it is all about health. I think that can be helpful.
It's easy to come across very attacking in those conversations, to say, and to feel very attacked, especially because there's already a lot of defensiveness. I mean, it's usually not a news flash to a person that someone's concerned about their use, or even that their use is unhealthy. But there's a very fine balance there between saying, to get someone to hear that message that, hey, I'm worried about your health, and they might already be sensitive to the idea that, oh, you're going to judge me. And so the problem then becomes a lot of people jump right in with a very judgmental approach too, right? I mean, so we're already sensitive, and someone says, hey, listen here, then it can already go badly before you even started.
Right. And once those defense blocks come up, it's very, very hard to get through it.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times, you mentioned timing, you both mentioned that, and I think that's huge, because a lot of times when there is an elephant in the room, we go back and forth between when we bring up something and it's in a fight, it's a bad time to get anything done. And then sometimes when we're not having a fight, we're slow to mention the elephant in the room because we don't want to rock the boat. If today's a good day and it doesn't seem like my partner is high today, then I don't want to ruin the Saturday. We're finally having a good day. And then if it's a bad day, I know they're not listening to me because they're already, they're already on something. So that's a really tricky issue. You have to be willing to pull the trigger during a good day ruin the good day, even if you have to have the conversation or start having the conversation.
But wouldn't that apply to any relationship or any issues with relationship, including with, your wife, your husband, your kids? There is an issue in the relationship, but you're having a good day, so it's a good time to talk, but you really don't want to destroy that moment because there are so many bad moments. I mean, I think that would apply pretty much to,
it does,
any confrontation.
No, you're right. So it's kind of a false start there to block ourselves from doing it. It becomes a bigger obstacle because we make it one then, is what you're saying. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, because eventually you're going to have to deal with it anyway. And delaying it's just going to bring that bad moment again. Mm-hmm. And then you think, I should have brought that up. It's really just delaying it.
Do you guys see that a lot where people have already put off the conversation or avoided it for a long, long time?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally people feel like they can manage it, and it's usually once it reaches a point where their life is really being affected in a detrimental way, that there is a moment of pausing and really being able to feel and understand that things are heading in a direction, and there's a loss of control and loss of things that are important and valued, and also some fear that starts to come in. That's very often when patients call us and come in for treatment. And usually one of the things that comes out in that is that they've been suffering far, far longer than they wanted to or needed to. And they wish they hadn't have waited so long. And almost inevitably I hear that. Because they feel ashamed, and then also it's hard to take that step, that leap of faith, and trusting in other people that they're going to care about, that they'll aid in your help and recovery and your health. And some people don't feel valuable enough. It really is a big part of it. So, usually families and friends respond well. Usually,
I find that sometimes I talk to people about what I call an ongoing conversation, that if I can't resolve a conversation right away, and this goes back to your point, Claire, of this is normal. It's normal to talk about big, heavy things several times before we make a large decision. I mean, how many times do we talk about a home purchase or moving somewhere? We don't just say that in a 10-minute conversation. So being willing to have an ongoing conversation that we are going to revisit, I think that's a huge pressure relief sometimes to these conversations, to say, I want to share my concerns with you. If you feel attacked, let's stop talking for a while and we'll talk again tomorrow. Or, I just ask that you think about it. And being willing to do that about a big problem, I think is healthy.
It is. It's healthy. It's important, but not to undermine. It is far from being easy.
Yes,
it is difficult.
Exactly.
Most people that are in this position are exhausted, are spent. The user himself is also feeling shame, feeling fear of not coming through, feeling fear of failing treatment, feeling fear of what's expected after treatment. So, a lot of people end up, using addiction as a clutch for everything. So there's a lot of transformation that is very scary for everybody involved. But David touched on something that is most patients that we have spoken a few months ago or a year ago that did not follow through. That's the first thing they say when they call. I wish I had gone in when I called you the first time. So regarding getting help, there's never a better time than now. That's for sure. There is, finding the good time where you can actually be heard. But regarding getting treatment, especially nowadays, that is so risky out there. There's no better time than now.
I wanted to get your guys' opinion on something that I hear people still talk about sometimes, which is the idea of kind of the classic intervention where, someone comes home and their entire their family and friends and extended family and their racquetball team, whoever, everybody is like in their house and says, we all love you. We got a car waiting outside. We want you to go to treatment right now. I mean, people talk about that and still have a perception. I wonder what your guys' thoughts are about those kinds of interventions that are fairly high pressure right off the bat for people.
It's risky. Sometimes they go well and sometimes they go poorly. I think you need to really know the person well as to how they might respond. I think there's probably certain situations where it can be effective, but it wouldn't be my first thought out of the gate, that's for sure. I think what you want to do is begin a dialogue and also ask questions. Like, why are you taking it? What are you interested in getting off it? When I'm speaking to people before they come in for our treatment, I'm asking them questions. I really want to get a sense of where they're at. And because it's more important than what anybody says to them. Because in the end, what sustains people is what's inside them, their commitment to it, their feeling about it. And if you really ask them without pressure, they'll tend to want to tell you, and you'll hear there's almost always some ambivalence, which is understandable. In fact, a lot of people getting better is how you manage and deal with the ambivalence. There might be situations where an intervention could be necessary if someone's in really, really unreachable and in real danger. I could see where that could be kind of something that you would go to.
I'm with you. I
agree with David.
Risky, yeah.
I think that it should be less recourse.
Mm-hmm. That's my feeling too. I guess the way I sort of phrased the question probably showed my bias too. But I think there's so many other forms of communication to try first.
If you picture in your mind, an intervention, you see the person in this corner feeling really small, and everybody confronting them. I mean, this person already feels alone, misunderstood, scared. So just the picture, the format of it makes whatever they're feeling so more intense. For me, it makes them want to hide more, want to shut down more. The afterwards is even scary, because if it goes south, now they're feeling more alone, more desperate, and they will use more drugs. So there is the risk of, what happens after.
Yeah, if I don't get into the car,
intervention.
If I don't go into the car that's idling outside to take me somewhere, then what do? Do we just sit down to dinner after that? Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
We've kind of burned a bridge there. I think that sometimes things like that come from desperation, which we've mentioned, people being exhausted and saying, I don't know what else to do. And I think, as you had put it, that's hard. It's fair enough to say people are willing to try almost anything. I think having that attempt at communication, sometimes finding a different kind of approach, like trying to get someone to maybe even come to some outpatient family counseling or couples counseling to talk about things, if they're not willing to go into their own specific treatment. If you can't do 100% of the healthy thing, try to do 90, try to do 50, try to do 10.
Exactly.
Right? Do what you can and whatever someone's willing to engage in.
I think often there's a confusion because, so if someone's struggling with using a substance, it can affect the people around them, and often does, and so they could feel upset and angry and so forth. There's a desire to kind of get the behavior changed because of how upset and how it's affecting them, and it's understandable that they'd want that. But the problem is that it's when the person who's using the drug feels, I'm sick of this, I'm tired of this, it's not working for me, I'm not doing this anymore. It's their own disgust and feeling about sort of what's happening and how it's affecting them that's sustaining. So it's a difficult balance between the two because people are affected, but really the sustaining principle is from the inside out, I think. And then you can work with it in many ways.
I think there becomes an idea that gets kicked around amongst people where they talk about someone who's a user saying, "Oh, once an addict, always an addict," and what's the old joke? I have unfortunately even heard professionals say this, where it's like, how can you tell if a drug user is lying because their lips are moving, right, or something like that, and
Correct.
it becomes this very, very big shaming kind of thing, and I think it contributes to that frustration where if I lose hope that my spouse or parent or child can ever be more healthy and not be using, if I lose hope in that, it's very, very difficult to invest in the relationship. And that's where you see people jump to say, I have to cut the person off. I have to kick them out. I have to do that kind of thing. And that's tricky because it's not to say that that's not ever something that people have to do, maybe for safety. But I think sometimes people get there really quick because they have people in their lives who tell them, "Oh, well, if that's the problem, you gotta just get them out of your life now. Get them out of your life. They'll never do better." And I think that's very damaging.
I think it's not just damaging. I think it's cruel. And I think the people that, and let me tell you, I have heard this through the last 20 years more often than I would like to believe from professionals. Once an addict, always an addict. If their lips are moving, they're lying. Do you know how many parents call and say, "Oh, they told me to wait until he hits bottom"?
Yes, exactly. And that's a real tricky thing with vague ideas. And I know you're not a fan of the concept of rock bottom, and for that reason, right? Because what does it mean? It doesn't have an objective meaning, first of all. And then, like you said, is the person who gave you that advice going to come to the funeral or and
Correct.
say, "Hey,
and
good
let me
for
tell
you,
you
high
something.
five"?
Somebody is injecting heroin. Wouldn't that be bottom enough for you? The people that are guiding these families, these loved ones, are people that truly do not understand what a human being is, what a human being needs. They just, heard or read somewhere that this is what to respond, but with zero attachment or responsibility to somebody else's life.
I believe sometimes those answers, the overly simplistic, bad answers that people get, I know that there's a pressure when someone looks at you and says, "Tell me what to do about my kid. Tell me right now. Tell me, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do?" There is pressure to have an answer that is like, "Do this 1 or 2 step thing, just do that." When in reality, I think you can always be assured that if someone's giving you a pat answer that applies to everybody, it's bad. The real answer is going to be nuanced. And to be honest, nuanced is often frustrating because it's like, well, it's case by case and you have to use your judgment. And we have to have some conversations about what's the difference between tough love and just setting boundaries and protecting yourself and lashing back. And all of that is a difficult conversation, but that's the healthy conversation. And if you have even a professional who's telling you some pat answer, they're probably not your friend. They're not helping you.
More than I think what you said is absolutely, but more than friend. I think the professional is not being helpful or honest. Sometimes you have to be humble enough to say, "I don't know. I am not sure."
Yeah, exactly.
Let's think about it together.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
One of the things that I thought would be good to talk about too is, what about on the brighter side when people are getting better and they're not using anymore and they're being healthy? One of the things I think people aren't always prepared for is that change is always difficult. Even healthy change is difficult. There's that old country song, right? Of like, "You ain't as much fun since you quit drinking." And unfortunately, sometimes it's sometimes really good changes happen, but some of those changes feel very awkward. Like their place in the family may change, or the way that they engage with things may change. What kind of feedback do we have for people when they're moving into a relationship where the user in their life is not using anymore? What kind of things should they be ready for? What helps?
The end of a successful treatment or help is creativity. That if the person was funny on the alcohol or whatever, they're still funny. The substance is overrated. They're just going through something, and they've got to become creative again in their life. The problem with substances is it makes you lazy. I hate to say it, but it's because it kind of the need to manage and develop ourselves and have things correlated from the inside out and the outside in, right? So that we're doing things that stimulate us. And I know from, working with just my own kids, as soon as they're bored, they become creative again. They actually start to do new things. If you just, so, and you can see that with, video machines. You take those away, and all of a sudden they start to do creative things. So you take away something from someone, then the next thing is, first of all, to not overestimate, that didn't make somebody funny or fun. They can be funny or fun without it. And to help them realize that and find that part of them that's creative, because they want to feel alive, and as they should. That's part of the goal of it. And so I really try to help and remind people of that potential and sort of pull them out of the whole cloud of just being, and minimize what the chemicals are, or the substances. I think it needs to be emphasized more.
I'm glad you mentioned fun, because that's so hard to get that back online, I think, to say, intoxicants are out of my life, opioids are out of my life. What do I do now? And you just hit it right on the head, I think, which is, well, you still do what you do. You still have passions. You still are funny. You still are smart. But it can take a minute for it to kick back online and say, oh, yeah, that's right. The world is still here, but I have to get back in touch with how it feels to be in it.
Let me ask you a question, David. Don't you believe there is patients after detox also feel, they miss that intensity of feeling everything? Like when they get high, it's very intense. When they get emotional, they feel very within themselves. Almost a feeling of missing that intensity of feelings that the drug brought to them.
We've had professional athletes and so forth come through who are like, I'm worried I won't be as good at this or that, whatever they're doing. And I'm like, don't worry, you'll be better at it. Your instincts will be sharper, so forth. And inevitably they report that. So I think that in my experience, there is a massive overestimation in whatever the substance is doing for people. And in fact, I really think about part of getting better and staying better is that insight, right? To deeply realize it really isn't doing as much as people think. And, but it feels that way. The perception is that, it's helping, and maybe it does at times lower inhibition. I think alcohol can do that, and it can increase energy. I know opioids can, give people energy and sometimes lower anxiety or inhibition. That's part of it for a short time, right? For a short time. But that first experience of it registers in the brain as if that's the reality. And the truth of it is, in terms of its longevity and the course of it, it actually depletes their ability to do those things. And so I think ultimately that first experience registers in the brain so profoundly that becomes a perception, but it's far less of the reality than people think.
Being situated where you guys are in California, around LA and Hollywood area and stuff, with a lot of creators and creative types, there becomes a myth there too, doesn't there? That if I'm a creative person, that part of that is that out of controlness of being like the sort of fractured genius and all that. That I'm better because I have less boundaries in my life and I'm kind of out there.
We have a need to change our consciousness. Like it's existed throughout time. I think good relationships help with that. I think having things that we enjoy that stimulate us. There's all kinds of ways to shift our consciousness, right? You go to a concert with that does it. There's many ways. Can't do that now, but there's many ways to shift our consciousness. But it takes creativity. We have to get back into a mode of living a more creative life again.
One thing that I often try to prep people for is the idea of parenting and household management. So especially if people have kids, I often say that it might, nothing is right for every single person, but I often say it might be good to even plan on some kind of communications, or even maybe even planning on having some couples counseling on the back burner, because you'll find that when someone is sober, they may have a whole different attitude of like parenting, of like, but being more involved and saying they have interests and opinions now. And it's a huge strength, but it can feel weird if I'm a person who for 15 years has been handling all the responsibilities in the house to all of a sudden have my partner be responsible and want to take part in things. It can feel threatening even.
Actually, then there is the other side where, a family member might have pushed somebody in to get treated and complain about, their substance use. And once they get treated, things change to such an extent that they were not prepared for, that they kind of sabotage somebody's recovery.
Oh, I think that happens
we
quite a
see
bit.
that often.
Yeah, I think that happens often.
There's the first part, which is dealing with the unwanted substance, and then there's everything else, right? And so, but I think people underestimate how strong they can be if they just hang in there and just keep going a step at a time and dealing with things. And you can actually get to the point where you want to deal with things. It's easier. You want to have the conversations. And, not always. Sometimes, there's situations that are untenable, and I think people fear that a lot. But I think people underestimate how strong they can actually be.
I think that's
I
definitely
agree with
true.
David.
Yeah, and I think that's a great takeaway message for people to have, is that all of these things seem so daunting. Is like even starting the conversation, if I'm struggling with that, is to say one thing that might be a great takeaway from our conversation is to first of all assume that you're stronger than you think you are, and that once you start this process, that you're going to find you have more resources than you believe you do.
I think that's it. And the world wants to aid people who are trying and being conscientious, who are being forthright, conscientious, and trying. Generally, it's appreciated. And so I think when you can move from that perspective, and if nothing else, just ask that of yourself and just go a step at a time, things tend to get better.
We're going to leave it there today on that hopeful note. I hope that you've been able to find some hope and some courage from today's conversation as well. I know that I have, and I always do when I'm on the show. If you'd like to learn more about the Wiseman Method Advanced Treatment for Opiate Dependence, go to www.opiates.com or send us an email, info@opiates.com. Any way that you reach out, just make sure that you reach out when you need it. The show today was hosted by Dwight Hurst, Claire Wiseman, and David Livingston. The music for the show is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. The show itself is produced by Pop Color Productions, a company specializing in creating podcasting and creative solutions for healthcare, nonprofit, and human services, and pretty much anyone else who wants to have a podcast. Thanks again for listening to us as we try to answer some of your and our questions about opiate dependence. Remember, keep asking questions, because when you ask questions, you'll find answers. And if you can find answers, then you can find hope. Bye-bye for now, and we'll talk to you again soon.